Yeah. So there's that. But my man, Dan Kovalik, the man of the hour, at the very least, the man for the next 30 minutes. Dan Kovalik, he is American human rights, labor rights lawyer, peace activist. He's also a professor at the University of Pittsburgh. And Dan, just make clear, are you currently a professor at the University of Pittsburgh? I apologize if I've asked you this before.
Yeah, no, I'm not. And there's a reason for that, which is interesting.
Well, I'm going to put, wait a minute, can you tell it or should I not?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, so because I taught there for 12 years and I had great student evaluations and faculty evaluations, and they ended up letting me go over my position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
I think you told me this.
Yes.
I think you told me this. That's outrageous. That's outrageous. Look, as somebody who lost their job, also because of apparently I was too seductive to the American public. Regardless of what I was telling them. I feel your pain on this. It is a painful thing to lose a job, especially when you feel like you're doing God's work. I think some people get us wrong on this stuff. Like I've had people write on as a comment, I can't believe you hate America this much. And as I try to point out to them, dude, I am a patriot. You may not like what I am saying, but I'm trying to get something across to you that your government needs to fundamentally change. It is not working in your best interests. And it's damn sure not in the world's best interests. And me pointing that out, it's not me being the bad guy. You know, the guy who's telling you there's a fire. You can't get mad at the guy for telling you there's a fire. You need to get out the building. So
that's right.
I don't know. It's just unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that, man. I really am, especially if you enjoy the job, you like the job, and you're.
You know, I did, but it didn't pay well. I mean, it's okay. I landed on my feet. It's all good, you know. But it is an interesting story. So
that sucks. All right, I brought you on because there's some interesting stuff happening in Syria, and I am fascinated by it. You are writing the book on Syria with Kuzmarov, Jeremy Kuzmarov.
Yes.
And so I thought you would be a fascinating person to talk to about this.
And I was just in Syria in January, and I was there in 2021 as well, twice. Yeah.
Okay, so the WAPO comes out with this story, and yes, I have it in the Google Doc. That's because I effectively did a Control-A, Control-C quickly before the document could refresh and go to the to paywall. So that's why it's in a Google Doc as opposed to being on Washington Post, but trust me, it's Washington Post. Syrian leader faces challenge of foreign militants who helped him win power. And you got to see this in real world terms here. These are Syrian militants killing each other. They're fighting each other.
يا ابو حسين الكبش
The guys have killed the rocket.
ولا هي الله حيوك نلعب الله حيوك.
Then you have other situations like this. All these guys walking around with guns, mean faces. I find all that to be terrifying. From my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way the Washington Post is describing it, they're doing a few things that I don't like. They're acting like Al-Jolani is somehow distant from the dogs that he employs. Like that this head chopper is somehow reformed, that chopping heads was just a phase he went through in his 20s, like punk rock, smoking cigarettes. He did a little head chopping on the side. And that the people who he's employing for HTS are somehow distinct from him. Now, it is true that there were multiple groups that were associated with HTS, but let's be very clear, this guy was one of the leaders of ISIS. He's not absolved from all of this. Him shaking hands with Donald Trump, him saying stuff like, I want to, Israel and I have the same enemy. Okay, well, that's problematic, right? Considering that the people who've been bombing you is Israel. Nobody else has been bombing you. Israel's been bombing you. And so some of these other groups that are more hardcore have taken issue with him, called him an infidel, just amazing, and have started going into skirmishes with one another. As almost, this kind of goes back to Marco Rubio saying that Syria may fundamentally collapse, regardless of removing the sanctions and everything else. Give me your take on this. I want to step into this a bit, but give me your take on just my opening explanation of what's happening.
Yeah, no, what you're saying is true. I mean, certainly Jilani. No, he basically, his last job was he was the head of the Al Nusra Front of Al Qaeda,
Uh-huh.
which became HTS, which is the current name. But yeah, he's Al Qaeda. That's what he is. And I certainly think he has. Well, I know he has because he's made statements that have essentially condoned violence that's been happening in Syria, particularly against minority groups like the Alawite community,
Right.
Christians. At the same time, it's also true that the HTS has 26 different factions, and each faction has factions within it. So it's also true that it is not a homogenous group, and it has many foreign fighters, and that has to be,
Uyghurs,
recognized.
Chechen,
Uyghurs, people from Uzbekistan, Turkey. At one point, the foreign minister of Syria, and this was the foreign minister under Assad, or actually, I think he was the ambassador to the UN, told the UN that they had found passports amongst the opposition fighters from 101 different countries.
Wow. It was just a melting pot.
It's over half the countries of the world.
Wow.
So, but to this day, about a third of the HTS fighters are foreign fighters, and that's growing. More and more fighters are coming in. Why? Because they smell blood and they smell the possibility of building a caliphate in Syria, religious caliphate, right, in which everyone would have to abide by Sharia law as they interpret it, which is a very, extremist form. In fact, some people think heretical form. In any case, so what you have at one time going on is the oppression and murder and exile of minority groups, which again is being blessed from the top by Jilani. But yes, you also have some intra group violence, like what you just showed. You also have, because of the violence against groups like the Alawites, you have secular groups rising up to protect themselves with arms against the government and its related forces. So the possibility, yes, of civil war and a total breakdown of Syria, sadly, is very likely. In fact, I would say not just likely, but probable, given all the things that we've just said. And honestly, I'm not sure that isn't the goal. I mean, when you look at, first of all, the Western powers brought Jilani to power. Okay, they supported him. They're supporting him now, as you said. He shook the hands of Trump, who said he's going to normalize relations and economic sanctions against Syria. As you said, Jilani has said he'd be willing to normalize relations with Israel. He is a Western-backed tool, and the overthrow of Assad was a Western project.
Right.
But look at what Israel, one of the backers of Jilani's, doing. It's destroyed pretty much, right? As soon as Jilani took power, Israel began bombing Syria, mostly its defenses, right? Because even with Jilani in power, Israel, and I believe the West, is interested in utterly disarming Syria, decapitating it, ending it as a viable state, like they did with Libya, like they did with Somalia, like they've done with Haiti, right? Like they did with Yugoslavia. They don't want a viable Syria because even though Jilani is a creation and a tool of the West, he may not always be a reliable one, right? And so they would prefer it just to be a balkanized country that will never challenge the West and in particular Israel again, right? Yeah. So for them, I'm not sure civil war is seen as a bad thing, right, by the West. That kind of chaos is what they actually was very predictable from what they've supported, because they've supported multiple um, militant groups there, some of which fight each other. In fact, I forget, a major news story. I think it was the LA Times reported years ago that at one point a group that the U.S. or the U.S. Defense Department was funding was fighting a group the CIA was funding.
Yep.
Right.
Under Obama. Yep.
Yeah, and Israel, an official admitted, I think in 2019, that Israel at one time was supporting 12 different militant groups in Syria. Again, not all of which got along. The point is, all this is not just predictable, but I would argue is probably intentional to utterly defang Syria as a viable state. And in addition to all those things, it's being carved up, right? Israel's taking more land. Turkey's taking land. The U.S. is still occupying a third of Syria, its most oil and grain-rich third. Trump he said during his first term, and he said now in his second term, that he wants to withdraw troops from there, but that's not happened. I don't know if that will happen. So it's balkanized by the West. It's being, a nation divided amongst itself in civil war and repression of minorities. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. I mean, Syria does not exist as a nation as it once did.
Wow. I guess their concern is, okay, yeah, we have Jolani, but who knows who's going to come behind him? And
yeah,
as you
probably
point out,
someone worse. I mean, I do think, it's sad to say, but things can always get worse. Yeah, I mean, there are more radical elements than him. And yeah, I mean, the possibility of one of those groups, more radical groups, coming to power is not out of the question. When I was in Syria in January, there were a few things said to me that were, I thought, said in a way that really clarified things. One guy, a Syrian, told me, he said, Dan, the only thing that has united these factions in HTS was jihad and the desire to create this caliphate. And he said, if that's not an element that's left, if that's not something Jolani's pursuing in an aggressive enough way, then that coalition of all those groups will fall apart, right? People, again, the third of the troops, I think there's about 30,000 HTS troops in total. About a third of those, so about 10,000 troops, are foreign fighters. They're not in Syria for a picnic. They're not in Syria to create democracy. They're in Syria for jihad and to set up a caliphate. If Jolani is not with that program, they will try to overthrow him, and they might, So
what was it like when you were there? Because
I was there in probably, I kind of was lucky in the sense that I threaded the needle. That is, I was there after the overthrow of Assad, and I was there before the worst violence against the minority groups, particularly the Alawites, began. There was that violence happening. Alawites in particular, were already being kidnapped, and Alawites, particularly in the town of Homs, were being killed in the hundreds, not in the thousands, like started to happen. And I stayed mostly in Damascus, though made it to Malula. So at that time, I would say the country was, what the part of the country I saw, most of it was filled with uncertainty, like what is going to happen? We don't know. The jihadists, the Al Qaeda folks were on the streets everywhere. They were the ones policing the place to the extent it was being policed. Now, I went to the town of Malula, which I've been to. That was the third time I was in Malula. That's a beautiful town, uh, which has these. It's a town built into the mountains. At various times, it's been populated by minority groups seeking shelter and safety in those mountains. Most recently, the Christians. And it's one of the last places on earth that speaks Aramaic, the language of Jesus Christ.
Really?
And was a very important tourist place and pilgrimage place for Christians, with some ancient churches, one of which goes, back to very shortly. A couple of them actually go back to very shortly after the death of Jesus. But when I went there, the town was a ghost town. There was almost no one in the churches, and I talked to a priest who said that a very good portion of the Christians had already left.
No, they're scared.
Left either certainly Malula for Damascus. Some left the country to Lebanon. Yeah, because the group in power, okay, the HTS, which was the al-Nusra Front of Al-Qaeda, in 2013 attacked Malula, tried to destroy it, tried to destroy the churches, kidnap the nuns. Okay, so they are not happy that those same people are now in power. You know what I found out when I was there in 2021, which, it really blew my mind, is, knowledgeable as I think I am about the Middle East and the world, this still surprised me. Do you know who defended that town, the Christians in the Christian town, against
Oh, Assad.
al-Nusra Front?
I would imagine Assad.
Assad, but guess who else? Hezbollah. Hezbollah came in from Lebanon, and they protected the Christians, which would be very surprising to a lot of people. It was surprising to me, I'll be honest.
But I didn't get to take that Hezbollah was anti-Christian. I just thought they were.
No, they're pro-Christian. They defended them.
Well,
They
that's my point. That's why.
defended the
That's what I'm saying. Why is it surprising? Like they were pushing back
because
against.
I wouldn't. I was surprised. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I didn't understand enough about Hezbollah. I was surprised they went out of their way to defend them.
Oh, I see.
You know what I
see.
mean? That they, and they did it again. I went to another church in Homs, which has a very interesting name, the Church of the Holy Girdle of Mary, because they claim to have the belt of the Virgin Mary in the church that they preserve.
Do they? Do they?
Yeah. Yes. And that was built. This church is one of the oldest churches on earth. The oldest part of it, which is a cave underneath the current church, was built in 69 AD. Okay. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, some of the Gospels weren't written until like 100 AD.
69 AD?
Yeah. And that church was attacked again by al-Nusra Front, some other groups, and Hezbollah again defended it. So, I mean, people should know that. It's a very interesting thing.
But see, what they are doing, meaning ISIS, them killing that stuff is heretical. Like, I remember when I was in Egypt.
Yeah, I don't think it can even be called Islamic. I mean, that's the thing. They call themselves Islamic, but
it's fascists.
Yeah, they're fascist. They have this. They follow this bizarre philosophy of Wahhabism, which Saudi Arabia has promoted. Which again, many Muslims believe is a heretical form of Islam.
I mean, the way they're going after Christians. Like when I was in Egypt, one of the things. Thank God, this was years ago. But I remember going to one of the mosques, and the guy was trying to explain to me how the Muslim religion also sees Jesus as a prophet. Yes, and how it was like he was showing this kind of breakdown, and how, look, we have zero issue. We have Coptic Christians here. Jesus was, and showing me the significance of Jesus in regards to the Muslim faith. And so if these guys are killing Christians, how is that Islam? Like it just seems like
of course. Well, and they're killing Muslims. Let's also say
and that too.
Alawites are Muslims. Shia are Muslims. They're persecuting those people too. So, I mean, right? They're crazies. I mean, it's probably the nicest way to put it. They're extremists. By the way, you know who else is even more important than Jesus to Muslims is the Virgin Mary. Believe it or not. And do you know Muslims, again, people need to get wrapped their head around this they need to understand what's happening. Do you know a Muslim family that goes back many generations has kept the keys and protected the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is where Jesus' body was buried. That
Interesting. Yeah.
church is not run by Christians, it's run by Muslims.
Muslims.
And the head of St. John the Baptizer is in Syria. And I believe it's not in a church, I believe it's in a mosque. Anyway, true Muslims are not, as you say, they're not anti Jesus, they're not
No.
anti Christian. Um, when I was in the West Bank in December of 2023, I went to a mosque to pray, really to show my solidarity, for people. And I wasn't doing it right. I was trying to do what they were doing. I wasn't doing it right. And a guy came over, a Muslim guy. And by the way, he said he was from Toledo, Ohio, which I think is great. I
Oh,
bet if you know Toledo, there's a beautiful mosque right outside it. Okay. I know that because my ex's family's from there. But
yeah.
anyway, he came up to me, said, "Oh, you're not doing that right. You can't put your elbows down. You got to lean on your head. In fact, if you see guys who pray a lot, their head has a bruise on it.
Yeah, they got a mark on
Big
it.
bruise.
Right.
But anyway, he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from Pittsburgh." And I said, "I'm a Roman Catholic." And he said, "You're welcome here." And again, we agreed because Jesus is a prophet, Abraham is a prophet,
Yeah.
Muhammad's a prophet. Those are the three big prophets of Islam. Anyway. And also, a lot of Muslims play important roles in Bethlehem in terms of protecting the religious sites there. Um, and as people always say, the Christian churches fared very well even under Hamas in Gaza, but now they've been destroyed by Israel.
Israel. Yeah.
So just Americans have to really put their heads around that. I mean, and I understand. I mean, a lot of people don't have the privilege that I've had of being able to travel to these places and see these things. And the truth is, again, and I'm probably going a little off the beaten track here, but
You're fine.
I was a fallen away Catholic for a long time, and really it was Palestinians, and mostly Muslim Palestinians, not Christian, but Palestinians, who kind of brought me back to the faith, you know,
Interesting.
um, because of their fervor. And again, because of their own love for Christianity, which I found incredible.
Yeah.
So,
Tell me something. What was Syria like on the ground after, like you said, you were able to thread the needle between the fall of Assad, but before the jihadists took over?
oh, no,
Did they
no,
have
they
coffee
took
shops?
over, but the main violence hadn't started yet.
Oh, I see. Were
The
they still
worst
coffee shops,
violence hadn't started. It was only
restaurants?
happening in spurts. Yeah. But they were fully in charge. No, they were fully in charge. And I saw them on the streets. Again, things were not in Damascus in particular, and I stayed in the Christian quarter of old Damascus. People were nervous, but things were not awful yet because
Okay.
the worst things had not started. So what has happened since I left is in the Christian quarter, which had, and I imbibed in them. I had bars with alcohol that the Christians ran those bars.
Did they? Okay.
Oh yeah, those some of those, and I don't know how many, but there's videos of the jihadists destroying those bars, shutting them down, um, starting to tax Christians for being Christians, essentially. Again, so the worst hadn't started. Though I met people again at that time, the worst treated even at that time were the Alawites, and I met a woman, an Alawite professor whose friend who was a professor, a woman Alawite who had just been kidnapped and killed. And then she, the woman I met, had just survived a kidnapping attempt. And that's still happening. By the way, people need to know that young women and girls are being kidnapped by this HTS group and sent to Idlib, where they're being forced into sexual slavery. And that was happening during the war, and
How is
that's
that
happening
justified
now.
under? See, this is why the God thing it screws with me.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
because religion can justify pretty much anything. And it's, as I used to tell my mom, it was like, you believe what you believe because you were taught it when you were a child. You just never got rid of it. And, Saudi Arabia was pumping this shit out to different mosques and everything else. It's like, hey, you're
Yes.
poor? Okay, we'll give you food and we're going to teach you this. We're going to, meaning you caught people who are susceptible to it and dump this into their minds. And for whatever reason, maybe they were sociopaths, maybe they love the power trip, maybe they love the fact that they could take a gun and go murder somebody. Who knows their rationale for it? Maybe they were fully in religious fervor in regards to chopping somebody's head off at that moment. I don't know what's in their minds. I do know it's poison. It's
poison.
Nazism, like nobody's business. How do they justify under religion?
What they believe is they say that the killing and raping of infidels and apostates is not haram. It's not forbidden under their bizarre brand of Islam. And let's face it, a lot of religions took that view. Even, let's face it, Christian missionaries and Catholic missionaries centuries ago would go to America,
But as you point out,
and they would rape and pillage and Native Americans and believe that they could do that, torture them, and if they didn't convert. So, a lot of extremist forms of religion, all kinds of religion, believe that that the infidels can be treated that way. I mean, there's even extremist Buddhists who believe that. There's, so probably every major church, there's extremist Hindus who do engage in that. I think every major religion has extremist factions that believe it's not sinful, or in the Islamic word haram, to do these bad things to infidels,
But see,
so.
I don't consider this religious. I consider this political. Like, this
Well,
is
of
no different
course,
than Zionism.
yeah, there is, there's political, but I think in the case, I think there is still a religious element to it. Again, it is masked. I agree, it's essentially political, but at least it's masked in this kind of pseudo-religious thing,
It's just
which they
outrageous.
believe in. At one time, can I just tell you, at one time, so in order to be able to travel around a little, I had to interface with some of these jihadists.
Did you? What was that like?
Oh, it was crazy. So at one point, so this guy I was with who had a relationship with these guys, and I still don't know to this day what his deal is, but before he went to Malula, he took me to this house, and there were like 10 jihadists in there, in this house, in their uniforms with their guns. And can I tell you something? This is true. And in the kind of on a shelf in the corner, the only thing they had on it was Vaseline. So I didn't know what that was about, but it didn't give me great comfort. Okay.
That's like the Puff Daddy thing, right? It's like,
Yeah,
1,000 bottles of
I was
lube.
worried about some serious hazing happening. But anyway, and then after we left Malula, we had to go back to that house, and there were 20 of those guys there, and they looked like, what you would
Beards and
envision
guns.
Al-Qaeda guys.
Vaseline.
Now, they were friendly with me because he vouched for me. This guy I was with, it was kind of my handler, or kind of my.
Yeah.
And, but I kept thinking to myself, if they Googled me or they figured out who I was, I'd probably be dead, or arrested, or minimally deported. That would be the best hope.
You weren't going to be
But
deported.
it was creepy, but that's who's running the show now.
What were they saying to you? I'm super, God, man, you've opened up a can of worms at the very end. What were they saying to you? Like, what was, is like, hello, this is my friend Dan. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He's from America, which again, that's fine with them because America
That was
brought
fine with
them
them
to
too.
power. He's a journalist from America, and he wants to report on what's happening here, report on the new Syria.
What did you ask them? And what did they say?
Well, honestly, I didn't ask them a lot. I mean, with these guys, I really, I'll be honest, I didn't say a lot because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't get me into trouble. I smiled a lot, and and kind of went
Anything
along
to trigger
get
them,
along.
basically.
Now they brought this translator in for me, a young guy. Now he was very open about his feelings that he's very supportive of these guys. He thought Idlib, where the terrorists are from and live, he thought that was a great place. Though he'd never been there, but he always wanted to go there and he had a totally messed up view of what happened in Malula, blamed it on Assad instead of these guys who it was their fault for, and they seemed, again, fervent in their religious beliefs. They were praying at times, and
that's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, I was shaking these guys' hands, and I was thinking I'm shaking hands with a guy who probably cut people's heads off with it. But that's how it goes. And I wish by the way, I so wish I had like a body cam or something. I mean, I wanted to take a photo, but I couldn't do that because it was wild. It was wild stuff, Wow,
that is terrifying. That is a hell of an experience, but that's terrifying. Because you're right. You don't know what you're going to. I'll tell you this, and I'm going to have to let you go. I remember when I was in, I think it was Bethlehem, and the woman who I was with, she was taking me because she wanted me to see her clinic in the occupied areas. And I remember we were in the cab. The guy asked me something like, "Are you religious?" or something like that. And my first response as an American, no, I don't believe in that. And the look she gave me was like, shut up. Like, don't answer that. Just don't answer. Just don't say anything. Like, basically, keep your mouth shut. Like, and I saw, even in a situation where she was walking through the streets, when they found out I was American, they didn't care. They was like, oh, okay, that's why he's earrings, that's why his tattoos. Yeah, they didn't care. However, you did have a few where she wasn't wearing her what is it called? Or hijab.
The hijab, yeah.
And the guy was freaking out, cursing in English. I wasn't even paying attention. I was literally sitting there eating a piece of corn because the guy gave me a free piece of corn as an American. And she snatches away from me, goes and attacks the guy. It scares the hell out of the guy. It scares the living shit out of the guy. And she says, you can't tolerate that nonsense. She was ferocious on either the Israeli side in Jerusalem or the other side against people who are extremists. She was ferocious.
Yeah, you could, I'm sure you saw, many Palestinians don't wear the hijab.
No, they don't. She didn't. She was Belgian Palestinian. She didn't wear it.
You wouldn't know that they're Muslim at all,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, she was ferocious. She was awesome. Daniel, fantastic breakdown. I am fascinated by this. I thankfully you made it out better alive.
Believe me, it was touch and go I was glad to leave. I was. Can I just show my book here, The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters, Why You Should Care? I'd appreciate if folks buy it, especially if you get it off Amazon. It really helps my algorithms, and I'm trying to really get that book sold. And then I have a new book on Syria coming out in September. We'll talk about that when it's closer to the due date. So
okay, and it's again, what's the odd name for the book one more time?
The new book, which book? The Palestine book?
The Case for Palestine.
Yeah, it's The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters, and Why You Should Care. And it has a foreword by George Galloway, former prime minister, or it's not former minister of parliament of Great Britain. Yeah. And
just be clear, like you said, you can get it off of Amazon. And just for the audience who know, Dan Kovalik, he's an American human rights, labor rights lawyer, peace activist. He was former professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Daniel, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Hey, I love your show, and I love you, man. I really think you're a great guy and doing great work, great journalism. And again, if I didn't congratulate you publicly, congratulations on your Serena Shim Award. You really deserve it.
I thought you did. Either way, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. I really do. You be safe, okay?
You too. Thank you. Take care.
All